Drew here, and it turns out the murderer was HBO Max all along. That's right. Like many of you, I imagine, I was planning to watch Mare of Easttown at 10 last night. I had set everything up to go, and then I discovered that apparently most of the internet was not being able to get onto the HBO Max site to watch this. In fact, they were getting an error message, and I was trying to watch it. I tried it with a Roku device, I tried it on my laptop, I tried it with my iPhone, I tried it with an Apple TV, and my brother and his wife were trying in Texas, and it took us all 30 minutes to actually get it to go up. So that's just disgraceful, just inexcusable, honestly. And you wonder why you're not as successful as Netflix, HBO Max. Get your head in the game. But moving past that digression, did the finale of Mare of Easttown live up to the hype? Well, for me, it did, and in a big way. And I feel that the reason that this ending worked, I think that Brad Ingelsby nailed it when he said that the ending needed to be surprising, but it also needed to be emotionally surprising. And he also said something I think that's really important, is that you need to surprise an audience, but you also need to reward your audience. I think that's something a lot of people have missed lately in their efforts to be subversive. They've failed to see that, subversion alone just ends up making an audience frustrated and angry and depressed. But when you actually give an audience an answer that they didn't see coming, but also an answer that's more rewarding than the answer that they could have imagined, that's when you hit the sweet spot. And I really feel like that's what Mare of Easttown did. Now, obviously, some of you had guessed before the finale aired who the eventual killer would be revealed to be. I myself, Thursday night, told my wife, I think I know who it is. I've been talking about it with people in the comments, and I think I know who it is now. And she's like, okay, I want you to go write it down, and then, it'll be verified if you knew or not, because I'm not going to believe you if you say you knew who it was while we're watching the episode. I'm like, okay. So we watched the episode, and it turned out to be exactly who I had pegged it to be after our discussions over the last week. Now, my initial theory last week was wrong. I had to have conversations with people and think long and hard about the show. But once someone had suggested this possibility, it rapidly became obvious to me that Ryan Ross was ultimately going to be the revealed killer. And the reason, in a large part, that I came to see that this had to be the case was because it made so much sense from a thematic standpoint. This show has been so much about overcoming trauma and also about the damage that parents can do to their kids. And you see both of those plot lines playing out with Ryan Ross. I think that there were a lot of other good candidates that people had guessed, people that you could think of logical reasons that they might have killed Aaron. I think that, Lori, for instance, was a very, very good theory. And John, to a certain degree would have made sense if it wasn't so obvious that it felt too soon to have revealed that it was him. But I think that, if you had it be the deacon who's Mare's cousin or any of these other characters, that might have given the audience some momentary satisfaction, like, aha, I thought he was suspicious. But I think from an emotional standpoint, it would have felt just a bit hollow. And I think that the reason that this ending worked was because it was something that was emotionally surprising but also satisfying, because it helped to play into the themes of Mare's story. Like all the best stories, Mare of Easttown was ultimately not just about solving a mystery. Obviously, solving a mystery was a big part of it, and that was the external goal that was moving Mare forward. But internally, her story has always been about a number of things. One, forgiving herself for her son's suicide, and also overcoming trauma so that she can move on. And ultimately, it was funny how many of us at the beginning just assumed that Guy Pearce was probably the killer. I think HBO played on everyone's understanding of Guy Pearce as an actor and the kinds of roles that he oftentimes plays, to use him as a glaring red herring. Even like the screen cap for this episode with him and Mare dancing really just made you think, it's him. But ultimately, I think he just represents the possibility that Mare can move past her trauma and that she can move on with her life. And this episode, obviously the follow-up to the cliffhanger from last week, I found a little bit underwhelming. I feel that that moment at the lake where Billy knows that his brother John is going to try and kill him and lets him do it anyways and says, "Go ahead, you'd be doing me a favor." It was an interesting moment. It kind of was unclear. It kind of seemed like maybe John wasn't going to have the nerve to do it, even to protect Ryan. But once you realize that John was acting to protect someone, you could assume that he just was acting out of self-preservation, but that really didn't seem consistent with who he had been up till this point. And yes, he's a selfish character who's done some bad things. And ultimately, I feel like you have to argue that Ryan's actions can be attributed squarely to what John did. And I feel like a lot of the fault lies with him, regardless of whether or not, he was the one who pulled the trigger to kill Aaron. But nonetheless, I feel that he is not a character that would put his brother away to square away his own guilt, that would kill his own brother to protect himself. So the question became immediately, who is John protecting? And once it became obvious this episode that Laurie seemed to know less about the situation than John did, it became pretty obvious that he was probably protecting Ryan. And when you look back at the episode where Ryan was in the cafeteria watching his sister get bullied, and then he steps in and beats the kid down with the tray, you see a couple things. One, there's clearly something tormenting him underneath the surface, and right there that should be a big hint that maybe there's more to Ryan Ross than meets the eye. But secondly, you see that he has an instinct to react violently to protect those he loves. And both of those things, coupled with the fact that it seems like the Ross family is hiding a dark secret, should have kind of led to this conclusion, I feel. And that's why I kind of arrived at this conclusion that it had to be most likely Ryan Ross. And as I suspected, Mare discovered it in exactly the way that I imagined that she would, which was that she went back to the house that has figured so heavily into this season. It was the first scene of the season was at this house, which is generally a good clue that something is important. I knew that that camera with the footage had to play into the story in a big way and would probably be the ultimate smoking gun that would reveal who the killer was. So to have that happen wasn't a surprise, but it still worked for me because it was something that you could predict. Sometimes something being predictable isn't bad if the reason that it's predictable is because the writers played fair and it makes sense both emotionally and logically. So to me, I was happy to see them follow through on what I expected them to. If they had done it in another way, I honestly would have been a little bit disappointed. So to me, the eventual revelation that it was Ryan, the only thing about it that didn't really fit for me is it was hard to imagine Ryan Ross as a cold-blooded killer. And, the eventual revelation that he didn't really mean to kill Aaron, that he was just trying to scare her off to protect his family, it made sense to me because it was hard for me to imagine him being this brutal murderer. So ultimately, I felt like him being the killer made sense for a lot of reasons. I think that it definitely, from an emotional standpoint, works because you have both Laurie and John experiencing this sadness that their marriage and their parenting have led him to this place and that they can't protect him. And that's a similar emotion to what Mary went through with her child. But also just because you knew that this mystery had to hit close to home for Mare, and the fact that it turns out to have been her best friend's son, and that ultimately her actions in solving this mystery have a cost for her friend, I thought that was pretty potent stuff. I particularly appreciated, though, Mare has a tendency in this show to get blamed for the deaths of other characters. Zabel's mother blamed Mare for her child's death, even though I think that the audience might look at that situation and lay it more squarely at Zabel's mother, who didn't push him out to be the kind of man that he could have been, who kind of kneecapped him so that he couldn't have the strength to survive. But nonetheless, you see in this scene with Laurie and Mare that after Deacon Mark's sermon, where he talked about not, blaming oneself and not accepting that one cannot be forgiven. I think you see Mare going back to Laurie, and this time refusing to be blamed for something and refusing to let her friend shut her out for her role in putting Ryan away for Aaron's murder. And to me, I thought that was an emotionally satisfying moment, and I feel like it was a strong moment that testified both to the power of their friendship and to the fact that in a small town life, you feel like you know someone, but there's always these dark buried secrets, which was a big theme of the show, which is another reason that I think Ryan Ross was a very, very satisfying final, he was a very satisfying culprit, because it turned out that we thought we knew the Ross family, and yet we didn't. It was someone that Mare was very close to, and it hit close to home for her that someone within this family had committed this murder. I feel, on another note, that it was nice that this episode kind of got back to more of the emotionally satisfying aspects from the premiere. I think it kind of, there was, the ultimate resolution to the mystery was in this episode, and that was a good chunk of the episode, but I feel like they still spent a lot of time just developing the characters and just closing out arcs. I think they did a good job of closing out pretty much every character's arc from my perspective. I thought that the resolution of Carrie's plotline could have been a little bit stronger. I would have liked to see more acknowledgement from Mare that she understands the struggles that Carrie is having, more forgiveness there, but I think that she showed a degree of sympathy and just acknowledging that she knew how hard Carrie had tried for Drew's sake. And on top of that, I feel that, just like overall this episode had a lot of emotional scenes, and it just wrapped up everything with a bow. I feel like I was very happy that they didn't try to leave any threads dangling for a second season, which makes me feel that if they actually did a second season, I would be interested in coming back, because this season ended in such a satisfying way. Now, obviously, second season means they have to put Mare through it again, and I'm not sure I want to see this character suffer anymore. But I'm glad that they chose to end this episode with her finally going up into the attic, facing her trauma and moving on from it. I feel like this was all really well done, and thematically, the whole of this season was greater than the sum of its parts. I feel like a lot of the middle episodes, I didn't really get what the season was going for, and that led me to have a frustrating sense that this show was just a standard procedural. But I've come back around to saying that it's a show that transcends the genre in many respects. I think that the thematic unity, the character development, the picture of small town life, the very, very detailed storytelling, I think that this is one of the better shows in this genre that I've ever seen, and I really, really enjoyed it. On a last little tangent, my wife started to notice that the coloring in Kate Winslet's hair would be higher and lower on her head between scenes, which made it really, really obvious that the show had been shot out of sequence. And for a show that had such consistency and detail, and where everything seemed to have really been thought out well for the most part, I feel that that was a funny decision on their part. You would have thought that they would have done a hairstyle where it would be less obvious that they were shooting things out of continuity. But that's a mild little complaint. I have, there's other mild things I could complain about. I don't think it really made sense that Dylan burned those notebooks so that his family could keep the child who was not actually his son. I feel that this revelation doesn't make sense when you realize that the whole reason that they found out the child wasn't actually Dylan's son is because they did the DNA test at the police's request in the first place. The police would already know that. So it was an odd decision from my perspective. I also felt that the scene at the beginning of this episode at the lake could have played out probably in a more exciting fashion. I felt like it was a little bit low-key. I was hoping there would be at least one thriller-esque moment this episode that would just blow my mind, and there really wasn't. It was mainly, just the emotional catharsis of the story. But on the whole, it did what it set out to do. And when you read the interviews with Brad Ingelsby and Kate Winslet and the other actors and writers involved on this project, you realize that they did exactly what they set out to do. And that's no small accomplishment. So those are my thoughts on the finale of Mare of Easttown. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.